The wind howled across the high desert like a wounded animal, kicking up red dust that stung the eyes and scraped the throat raw. Elias Thorne sat his horse on the ridge above the dry wash, reins slack in his gloved hands, staring down at the impossible sight below, a woman on her knees in the cracked riverbed, digging with bare fingers into the sun-baked clay as if she could coax water from stone. Her dress, once the color of summer wheat, hung in tatters around her bones. A chilled shoe, teeny, useless, lay discarded beside her. Elias felt the emptiness in his own saddlebags like a second heartbeat. One strip of jerky, half a canteen, and the last of the hardtack. Enough for one man to reach the trading post at Bitter Creek. Not enough for two. He nudged the mare forward. The woman didn't look up until his shadow fell across her. When she did, her eyes were the gray of winter sky, flat, exhausted, and ancient in a face no older than 30. She straightened with the slow dignity of someone who had decided long ago that pride was the only thing left to own. "Keep riding, cowboy," she said in Spanish, voice cracked like the earth beneath her. "No necesito tu lástima." Elias dismounted. The mare snorted, sensing the tension. He unbuckled the saddlebag and drew out the jerky, the canteen, the hardtack wrapped in oilskin. He laid them on the ground between them like an offering to a weary god. "Not pity," he answered in the same tongue, the words rusty but true. "Hunger recognizes hunger." She stared at the food as if it might vanish. Her hands trembled, but she didn't reach. "I have a daughter," she said finally. "Somewhere." The word cracked open something inside Elias they kept nailed shut for years. "The wagon train left us 3 days back. Feber took my husband. The others said we slowed them down." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. They were right. Elias glanced at the chilled shoe. "Cisse of his thumb." He swallowed dust. "I'm headed to Bitter Creek," he said. "Trading post. They have water, beans, maybe a doctor. There is no, we she couldn't walk alone now." He studied her. The sun had bleached her hair the color of straw, sunburn peeled from her shoulders in thin white curls. Her feet were wrapped in burlap gun stiff with blood. Yet her chin lifted, defiant. "Alone gets you dead," he said softly. "Dead gets me to my girdle faster than begging." Silence stretched between them, thin as the jerky on the ground. Elias felt the old scar along his ribs itch, the one from a Comanche arrow outside Lubbock, the one that taught him how fast a man can bleed out when the world turns its back. He thought of his own daughter, Clara, waiting in a soddy in Kansas with her aunt. He thought of the letter he carried, creased and sweat-stained, promising they'd be home by harvest. He thought of the empty saddlebag and the long miles ahead. He picked up the jerky, tore it in half with his teeth, and held out the larger piece. "Take it or leave it," he said. "But if you leave it, the buzzards get a feast and you get nothing." Her fingers closed around the meat before her pride could stop them. She ate like a wolf, fast, desperate, eyes never leaving his. When the jerky was gone, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and stared at the hardtack. "That's yours," she said. "Was," he corrected. "Now it's ours." She laughed again, softer this time. "You're a fool, Vaquero. Been called worse." He offered the canteen. She drank in small, careful sips, then stoppered it and handed it back. Alf remained. "Name is Elias Thorne," he said. "Marisol Vega." They stood in the furnace heat, two strangers bound by the thin thread of shared starvation. Elias scanned the horizon. Eight devils danced above the mesa. No sign of the wagon train, no smoke, no hope. "We'll follow the dry wash north," he decided. "There is a spring the could use, maybe 2 days if we push." Marisol's gaze flicked to the child's shoe. "I can't leave without." "You won't, eh?" He picked up the tiny shoe, tucked it into his vest pocket next to Clara's letter. "We find her." She searched his face for the lie and found none. Something shifted behind her eyes, grief giving way to the slender blade of possibility. They set out at dusk when the temperature dropped enough to breathe. Elias walked, leading the mare. Marisol rode side saddle, her bare feet dangling. The stars came out like salt spilled across black velvet. Coyotes yipped in the distance. Elias told her about Kansas, about Clara's gap-toothed grin and the way she chased chickens with a stick twice her size. Marisol spoke of her daughter, Lucia, who could name every wildflower between Santa Fe and the Pecos. Her voice grew steadier with each mile, as if memory were a poultice drawing poison from the wound. On the second night, the mare threw a shoe. Elias cursed under his breath, knelt in the moonlight, and pried the bent iron free with his knife. Marisol watched, then wordlessly took the blade and began carving slivers from a mesquite branch to splint the hoof. Her hands, though blistered, moved with the sureness of someone who had mended wagons and dreams alike. "You ride," she said when the job was done. "I walk." "No. I'm ladder. Horse lasts longer." He started to argue, then saw the set of her jaw. "Breathe again." He nodded. They traded places. The mare limped but held. Dawn painted the sky the color of fresh blood. Elias' stomach cramped, the last of the hardtack had vanished hours ago. He kept his eyes on the horizon, willing the spring into existence. It appeared at noon, a seat no wider than a wagon wheel, cradled in a hollow of red rock. Green moss clung to the stone like a miracle. Elias dropped to his knees and drank until his belly ached. Marisol filled the canteen, then cupped water in her palms and let it trickle over her head. She laughed, really laughed. For the first time, the sound bright as bells against the canyon walls. They rested in the shade of a cottonwood. Elias Docet had over his eyes. When he woke, Marisol was gone. Panic clawed his throat. He scrambled up, scanning the scrub. Tracks, smell, bear, led east along a game trail. He followed, heart hammering, until he found her kneeling beside a clump of prickly pear. She held a handful of tuna, the red fruit split open to reveal pale flesh. "I'd eat these," she said without looking up. "Lucia and I lived on them for a week once, after the flood took our corn." She offered him half. Chews ran down their chins like forgiveness. That afternoon, the mare lay down and would not rise. Elias felt the animal's ribs beneath his palm, sharp as accusations. He unsaddled her, removed the bridle, and turned her loose with a slap on the rump. She staggered a few steps, then stood trembling in the heat. "End of the line for her," he said. Marisol's eyes filled. "She carried us this far." They left the saddle where it lay. Elias slung the canteen over his shoulder, Marisol carried the mesquite splints like a staff. They walked. The land grew crueler, cactus spines, shale that sliced boot leather, sun that boiled the blood. Elias' tongue swelled. Marisol's lips cracked and bled. Yet they kept moving, one foot in front of the other, the child's shoe a talisman in Elias' pocket. On the fourth day, they crested a rise and saw smoke, thin, gray, curling above a stand of juniper. Elias' knees buckled. Marisol caught his arm. "Wagon train," she whispered. "Could be Paiute. Couldn't be anyone." They descended cautiously. The smoke resolved into a campfire. 3 wagons circled like wagons in stories, canvas tops sun-bleached and patched. A dozen people moved among them, men, women, a boy chasing a dog. And there, hanging wash on a line strung between 2 wheels, a little girl with braids and a dress the color of Marisol's eyes. Marisol made a sound, half sob, half prayer, and ran. Elias followed, legs burning. The girl turned. Timis loathed. Lucia's face crumpled in recognition, then jaw. She flew into her mujer's arms. Marisol sank to the dirt, clutching her daughter as if the world might snatch her away again. The camp fell silent, watching. An older man approached, beard like steel wool, eyes sharp beneath a battered hat. "Marisol Vega?" His voice carried the weight of authority. "We thought the desert took you." Marisol lifted her head. It tried. The man's gaze shifted to Elias. "And you?" "Elias Thorne. Kansas bound." The man studied the empty saddlebags, the blistered feet, the child's shoe now clutched in Lucia's small fist. Something softened in his face. "You walked her out of hell." Elias shrugged, suddenly shy. "She walked me." That night, the wagon train fed them, beans thick with salt pork, cornbread still warm from the Dutch oven. Elias ate until he thought he'd burst, then ate more because Marisol pressed seconds on him with a look that dared refusal. Lucia fell asleep against her mujer's side, thumb in mouth, the shoe tucked under her cheek like a doll. Later, by the fire, the wagon master, name of Hargrove, offered Elias a place. "We re short a driver. Oxen know the trail to California, but they don't know kindness. You do." Elias stared into the flames. Kansas pulled at him like a tide. Clara's letter weighed heavy in his pocket. But Marisol sat across the fire, braiding Lucia's hair by firelight, and he saw the future branching like the cottonwood at the spring, one path west with strangers who had become family, one east to a daughter who might not recognize the men the desert had carved from his bones. "Estud. Need to send a telegram from Bitter Creek," he said. "Dan ieye de sal." Hargrove nodded. "Fair enough." 3 days later, they reached the trading post, a cluster of adobe buildings squatting beside a trickle of brown water. Elias wired Clara's hand, delayed. "Safe. Comin son." He paid with the last of his silver, then stood outside the telegraph office, hat in hand, watching dust devils spin across the street. Marisol found him there. "Lucia wants to know if the cowboy who saved her mom is coming to California." Elias smiled, the expression strange on his sunburned face. "Tell her cowboys don't save anyone. They just refuse to look away." Marisol studied him. "And you? Where do you look now?" He thought of the mare wandering the desert, of the jerky divided in the dust, of the chilled shoe that had crossed 100 miles of heartbreak. He thought of Clara chasing chickens, of Lucia naming wildflowers, of the way Marisol's laugh had cracked open the night. "West," he said. "For now." They left at dawn. Elias drove the lead wagon, Marisol beside him on the seat, Lucia asleep in the bed among sacks of flour and dreams. The trail stretched ahead like a promise. Behind them, the desert shimmered, vast and indifferent, but no longer empty. Years later, travelers on the California road would speak of a wagon train that never left anyone behind. They'd tell of a driver with Kansas dust in his voice and a woman beside him who could coax water from stone and laughter from grief. They'd mention a little girl who carried a tiny shoe in her pocket and greeted every stranger with the same words her mother once spat like a curse. "No necesito tu lástima." But she'd say it with a smile, because she'd learned what her mother learned in the dry wash under a merciless sun, that pity is a small word for the large thing that happens when one human being refuses to let another disappear. And somewhere, in a soddy in Kansas, a girl named Clara grew up on stories of her father's long road home, never knowing that the delay that broke her childish heart was the same journey that taught a starving woman, a grieving cowboy, and an entire wagon train the true meaning of the word enough. The desert kept its secrets, but it gave back something better, the certainty that kindness, once given, multiplies like stars in a desert sky, endless, unexpected, and bright enough to guide the lost all the way home.